Chapter 2. The Bard's Tale. He was my friend.
Upon the stage, within the confines of a small, cramped tavern, a small, timorous bard fiddled with the strings of his lute. The crowd, consisting of mostly middle-aged, grisly-looking men, stared at him, snorting and coughing through the silence as they waited for him to begin. He made himself comfortable. The stool he found himself sitting on wobbled unsteadily as he shuffled around, now fiddling with his pecan brown hair, making sure it remained tied within the small ponytail at the back of his head. Then, with a quiet, deep exhale, he set his light brown eyes upon the crowd, gently struck the strings of his lute, and began his story.
On the brink of dusk, one silent, bitter, cold night, in the year 532, the father of all evil cursed the land with his offspring. It was in the catacombs of an old rustic church, where the woman screamed all manner of words, the midwives standing around her like vultures as she cried and yelled in agony. The life soon faded from her eyes, the ominous silence filled with the cries of her terrible creature of a child. Eyes like fire, claws like a beast, the teeth of a monster from your nightmares. No man or woman was left in that church by the child's 5th year, for they had lost their lives in the line of protecting this unholy offspring, be it that he killed them himself, or they died by the hand of the Diabolus, hunters of this abomination. But the creature had gained the likeness of a human over his years of feasting on his protectors, and once they had all fallen, he set out into the world to find his place. As horrific as he might sound, as morbid as his life may have already been, he wanted not to harm. To find the love he deserved, that is all he wanted. But his evil monster of a father shared no interest in his child, and instead revealed himself to be the mind behind the Diabolus. The child was alone, hunted, and without hope.
The bard paused, in both speech and tune, taking a moment to catch his breath, and looked around at the observing crowd. Content that they were intrigued to hear more, he smiled and continued.
Soon he became a man, and, as all men do, he came to have a family of a fair maiden and her 2 boys, destined for greatness. But greatness they did not reach. No, the Diabolus took them from him, just as they took those that raised him. A man, however, he did not remain. The god of beginnings, also known by man and woman as Janus, he approached our story's idiosyncratic hero and offered him what he needed to fight the foe that had been haunting him all his life: immortality. If he were to take it, the god said, it would wane after 30 days and 30 nights. So, take it he did. And suffer he sure would. His skin became as pale as ice, and his heart just as so. Where he may have been gifted power beyond the mind's comprehension, he was cursed with the thirst for blood. And in sunlight, he would forever be shunned. But it was of no care to him, as revenge was all that remained on his mind. He slew his enemies, eradicating them day by day until not one remained. But it wasn't until then that he understood that Janus was a trickster god. The curse did not wane. His hunger only grew stronger, and his anger became something of the gods themselves. Janus met his end at the hands of the creature he created. But the creature was then left without hope, without purpose, and without love, without belonging. As cold as his life had started, it only seemed to grow colder. One fateful night, however, did that creature find himself in the same city as a humble, talented bard by the name of Elvin Vangor. And, little to his vast knowledge, would he ever know that this great man of talent would become his ally, his friend, and, dare I say, his love!
Finished, the bard, recently revealing his name to be Elvin, ceased playing his lute and searched the crowd of expressionless faces for applaud, for reaction, but neither came to him. He pouted, tucking a loose strand of brown hair behind his ear, several locks having broken free of the ribbon that kept it tied behind his head. His light brown eyes frantically searched the room, a look of remorse smothering his face. But then, from the crowd, someone raised their hand.
Yes, you!
The bard welcomed, a look of relief on his face. The barmaid stood up, her ratty hair a filthy blonde. A stubborn pout clung to her face as she crossed her arms.
Sounds to me like you was talking about the story of the night beast. Everyone spats that story in this place. You just changed some of the words.
She accused. Elvin frowned.
For your information, lady, I happen to travel the land far and wide with the story's main character, so you best believe that I possess the original material.
He claimed proudly, a humble look on his face.
Whether words be changed or not, only I know the story in its fullest.
A man then stood up and laughed.
So says the last guy that came in here.
The crowd laughed with him.
Why do you tell it like we should feel sorry for him?
A brunette woman called from the back of the room.
That creature kills and destroys wherever it goes. You talk like it's your friend.
The bard tapped his lute and smirked.
There are always many sides to a story, my lady.
He smiled.
Besides, you ought to know the truth, for he is soon to introduce us to a world where vampires and humans live together!
He cheered. The blonde, ratty-haired woman then scoffed.
Those rich folk up in Dargamore have no idea what they've been getting themselves into, sharing their city with filthy, blood-sucking vampires. It's preposterous!
As she spoke, the crowd yelled in agreement, making Elvin pout in irritancy.
We're tired of your dumb stories!
Someone then yelled.
Tell us something new!
The bard shook his head.
It's not preposterous at all. He's kept the werewolves away from you all, and he's gonna keep the vampires from being troublesome too!
He argued.
We can deal with the werewolves alone.
The woman yelled.
The city council seems to feel different.
The bard pouted.
Why don't you tell us something else?
A man screamed.
Fine!
The bard then called.
Have you ever heard about the time he cleansed Weisenmoor of werewolves? I was there for that.
That creature turned everyone in that place into monsters just like him.
A woman argued.
We're tired of you!
Someone else yelled.
What about the Battle of Hatchery Manor?
The bard called, prepping to play his lute.
There's no way anyone could have...
Get off the stage!
A man yelled, lobbing his half-empty mug at him.
Hey!
He yelled back. The crowd started booing, insisting he left the stage, lobbing whatever small items they could find at him. So, leave he did. He picked up his lute, kicked back the stool he had sat upon, and hurried down the crooked steps. He pouted and dragged himself away from the crowd, placing his loot atop the bar as he slumped down on one of the stools. He scowled down at his hands, but as another bard emerged onto the stage, he glared back over his shoulder.
Ungrateful peasants wouldn't know a good story if it smacked them in their ugly faces.
Then, as the crowd started cheering in response to the new bard's story, Elvin scowled, gritted his teeth, and crossed his arms on the bar.
Stupid.
Is he really your friend?
The bard flinched in startlement and looked in front of him.
What?
He asked, setting his eyes on the brunette woman who stood behind the bar, the same woman that had asked if he was a friend of his story's focus. She smiled and handed him an empty glass, her eyes glistening a dull green.
Your story was about the vampire, right? The very first one that came to this land 400 or so years ago?
As she filled his glass, he fiddled with the loose strands of his hair.
It's true. I know him for who he really is. All these stories the other bards tell are poppycock. He's doing good here. People just don't want to see it because of what he is.
With a small giggle, she leaned into the bar and stared at him.
If you really are his friend, why are you still alive? Why are you not as pale as the stories say he is?
She asked.
That's exactly why! Because I, Elvin Vangor, am his friend!
He smiled, sipping from the glass she had just filled for him.
He doesn't hurt his friends, or anyone, as a matter of fact, only those that deserve it.
And then, where is he?
The barmaid asked, looking around slowly.
Shouldn't a humble bard remain at his chosen subject's side?
She smirked. Elvin shrugged.
He had something to do.
Of course he did.
She smiled, wiping down the bar.
What do you plan to do with the rest of your night?
Again, he shrugged and leaned his arm onto the bar.
Wait around?
She laughed.
For your vampire friend?
He then sighed and looked over at her.
You don't believe me, do you?
He asked. And as she smiled sweetly, he pouted.
No one believes me or my stories. They're the truth, I tell you.
Sure, love.
She smiled, tapping the bar.
That'll be a piece of silver.
With a sour look on his face, Elvin reached into his pockets, pulled out a small silver coin, and dropped it onto the bar. He then picked up his loot and made his way over to the tavern's door, ignoring the crowd's jeers as the new bard sang atop the stage.
I hate this place.
He grumbled to himself as he kicked the door shut behind him, emerging onto the cold, dark, damp cobblestone street. Elvin glanced up at the star-filled sky, admiring the array of beautiful colors spread throughout it as a result of the 6 brightly glowing moons. That which sat the highest in the sky was the most ominous of them all, and the smallest. It shone a dark purple, a glimmering aura pulsating around it. Beneath it hung the similarly sized silver and gold moons, the silver behind the largest, brightest blood-red moon. A smaller, dimmer purple moon lingered behind it, only just visible through its overpowering glow. Beneath them was the last, smaller ice blue moon, shimmering as brightly as it could manage. They all hung closely to one another, lighting up the world below with their striking colors. The bard eyed each one with little interest and sighed. Making his way onto the main street, he looked up and down the road lit with lights from the many buildings lined along it. Not a single person in sight. He had no idea where he was supposed to go now. Not a single tavern in this town had appreciated his tales, and he was sure that no place ever would. The sour look didn't leave his face as he turned left, making his way up the quiet road, muttering to himself.
Better than that guy. He was just singing some nonsense about some ugly lady and her stupid man friend. No one wants to hear about that. Stupid love stories. Stupid bard. Stupid tavern.
He grumbled. He then stood and glared back at where he had come from.
I'm better than any other bard in this whole damn continent!
He insisted, but then pouted and looked down at the ground.
I'm talented.
His words hadn't gone unheard. He sharply turned his head, a low growl breaking through the night's ominous silence. He frowned and gripped his lute tightly. He watched a pair of dim yellow eyes appear within the darkness of the alley across the road. He dropped his lute, stood on one leg as if to run, and screamed like a little girl. Before Elvin could run, a blur of a beast pounced out of the shadows and crashed into him, pinning him against the wall. The bard continued to scream hysterically, the wolfish monster snarling ferociously in his face. With the sound of slicing metal, the beast fell silent and still, staring into the bard's horrified eyes as he stared back. Blood then exploded from the wolf's neck, spraying all over the bard's revolted face. And as the creature's head slid off its body, Elvin squirmed around in revolt. The beast hit the ground, and as the river of blood seeped down the street, the bard frantically dragged his hands over his face, trying to wipe the blood away. But then he gritted his teeth in anger, revolted by the blood that had covered him. He sharply turned his head, setting his eyes on who could only be his savior.
You always do this to me!
Elvin exclaimed, stumbling back as he set his sights on the tall, strongly built, ice-pale man who stood with a dead beast at his feet, a bloody rapier in his right hand. Where Elvin stood a mere 5'5", this man stood just above 6 foot tall. Adorned in a white fur-collared crimson cape, a black blazer-like coat beneath it, he took his eyes off the beast and glared over at Elvin. It looked almost as if fire itself raged within his devilish eyes, his pupils thin and slit-like that of a cat's. The moonlight shone down on his red-as-blood hair, which fell to his jaw in length, tied loosely behind his head, much like Elvin's. He wore a small, shimmering gold-looped earring in his right sharply pointed ear. An irritated look clung to his pale face as he flicked his sword, banishing the beast's blood from its blade before sheathing it at his side. Elvin held out his arms and shrugged.
Well, will you just stand there, or do you think an apology is in order?
It is. For the people you discuss with your stories.
He smirked, his accent so thick it was impossible to assume he hailed from the same land as the bard. The bard pouted and crossed his arms.
Even you hate my stories. You should thank me. You know I go out of my way to try and tell people your real story. The people here aren't so open to this whole become allies with the humans thing you got going on with the city.
And do they listen?
He asked, stepping away from the dead, headless beast.
No.
He pouted.
Then I suggest you find a new hobby.
He said, glancing down at Elvin's shattered lute. Only just coming to notice his precious instrument had suffered in its fall, Elvin screeched hysterically and dropped to his knees beside it.
Why must I suffer so greatly this horrific night?
He called.
You grieve for your lute, yet it doesn't matter that you almost became something's food?
Elvin looked up at him.
I almost became something's food every night, Buren.
He scowled.
Why are you so bitter?
You're the one that chose to follow me around.
He shrugged, watching as the bard climbed to his feet. Wiping his trousers, Elvin pouted.
How else am I supposed to write a story?
He asked, walking beside Vuren as he led the way up the street, leaving the dead wolf on the roadside. Elvin glanced back at it and frowned.
And you're just gonna leave that there? In the forest, sure, but here in the middle of the road?
My people will come and get rid of it. Anyway, no one is going to listen when you try to tell the better side of a story that has forever been told as a tale of horror and murder. The people in this town can hate my plan all they want. It is happening, whether they like it or not. As for your story, if it means so much to you, have you not thought about making it about someone else?
He asked.
Well, you convinced the city to live with vampires, so I'm sure this place will come around eventually. And why would I want to write about anyone else?
He scoffed, looking over at him.
You're the greatest man I've ever come to meet. Where else in this boring world do you think I could find someone like Alucard, the son of Newman, Vuren, the vampire lord of the night, Vlad, the first monster to walk the land in the body of a man?
He sang.
There's no one else out there I could ever possibly want to write about.
Alucard rolled his eyes in response.
That's not what I meant. My name has been spoke ill of for too many centuries. Write about me, but give me a new name.
Elvin pointed at him as his eyes filled with astonishment.
You're right!
He cheered, clapping his hands.
No one would be none the wiser!
He grinned, plotting.
Oh, but what to call you? Something.
He said, tapping his chin.
I'll think of the greatest name.
He insisted.
Just leave the backstory out, huh?
Alucard requested.
Why? Your past is what got you to where you are now. How can I just take that out?
Because it doesn't need to be known.
He snarled. The bard hung his head in shame.
Yeah, you're right. Where were you, anyway? Do you have new content for me?
He asked, reaching into his waistcoat, pulling out a notebook. His adoration for Alucard made him so very excited, so very eager.
Not yet.
Alucard refused.
I had to go somewhere.
Where?
Elvin asked as they approached the town's exit.
Somewhere.
He mumbled.
Tell me? Please?
He asked, tucking his notebook away.
No.
Alucard denied. Elvin pouted.
You never tell me anything.
Alucard looked over at him and sighed.
Damien needs me to meet him.
Oh, Damien, huh?
He nodded, a look of angst smothering his once eager face.
What'd you have to do? Meet someone again? More werewolf stuff? Diabolus?
Neither.
Alucard said, glaring ahead as they followed a dirt path out of the town and towards a small forest. The bard eyed the vampire skeptically.
Did you have a date, Vuren?
What?
He snapped, looking over at him.
I don't care what it was.
A nervous laugh broke free of Elvin's sigh.
Yeah, true. Well, whatever it was. Probably not a date. I want all the details when we get back home. I feel like this might be one from my manuscript.
Elvin cheered, clapping his hands excitedly.
If you are failing as a bard, what makes you think someone's going to want to publish your manuscript?
The vampire questioned. Elvin shrugged.
I'll make it one day. I just gotta find the right angle, you know? And now, with your suggestion of a new name, I might just be on my way.
He smiled.
Right.
Alucard mumbled, glaring ahead again.
Well, good luck with that.
Aw, Vuren.
Elvin smiled, looking over at him.
You're so supportive.
Am I?
He grumbled, stepping aside before Elvin could place his hand on his shoulder. Elvin frowned in discontent, but then bounced up and down.
Oh, can I write down that little rescue back there? I bet you were chasing that wolf for miles, weren't you? If it weren't for me being there at that exact time, you would have never caught up with it, would you?
Alucard glanced over at him.
That is not what happens at all.
He scowled.
Yeah, but you told me to switch things up. People don't want to hear about a scary vampire killing things and saving people. They want to hear about a mere bard saving a vampire.
Do they?
He asked doubtfully. As they came out of the other side of the forest and onto a white sand beach, Elvin nodded confidently, but then pouted.
You're always so mean to me, you know?
He frowned.
Sometimes I feel like you don't believe in me. I so happen to think this idea would make a great story.
Do you think everything makes a great story?
Well, it does. If you tell it right.
He insisted. Alucard rolled his eyes.
Wait here for me.
Come on, man. You're making me wait on a beach? What if more werewolves come? Or pirates? I could be mugged.
The vampire looked him up and down.
You wouldn't exactly make a gratifying snack for a wolf, nor do you possess much at all for a pirate to steal.
Wow.
Elvin pouted.
Crude as ever. Please, can I come?
He pleaded, holding his hands together.
I'll keep my mouth shut. I'll just stand in a little corner and observe. You won't even know I'm there.
No.
He refused again. Elvin crossed his arms and pouted stubbornly.
Fine, but if I get eaten, it's on you.
A lot of things are on me these days.
He grumbled.
Sit over there.
He instructed, nodding over at a single tree.
I won't be long. I just have to talk to them this time.
Sighing, Elvin dragged himself over to the tree, slumped down, and crossed his arms.
Alucard then set his eyes on the open sea ahead. In the distance, a ship was barely visible on the horizon. That was where he needed to go next. Without much falter, he disappeared into vermilion smoke and sped across the water, reaching the ship in less than a few minutes. He landed on the deck with a thump and waited impatiently as a tall, sleek man dressed in a black long coat stepped out from the cabin beneath the quarterdeck.
Long night?
He called, his face as vacant as Alucard's.
When is it ever not?
Alucard replied, glaring into the man's crimson eyes, much of his face hidden beneath his coat's hood. He smirked.
What the news?
I will be working with a Zeman.
He mumbled with irritancy, taking his eyes off the man to glare out at the ocean.
I'm moving vampires from another world, Eltaria. They will be staying here in Dorsanguz.
He explained, slowly setting his eyes back on the man.
There won't be enough space here soon enough, so we need to hurry up and re-establish the empire I had before I disappeared.
The man nodded.
Don't worry. I've got the king eating out of my hands.
He smirked.
Make him beg.
Alucard mumbled.
Evil not be our friend. Evil work for me, not with me.
Of course.
The man nodded with a humble bow of apology.
Now go.
Alucard sighed.
I will see you in less than a month, no?
I'll see you then.
Then, Alucard disappeared into vermilion smoke once more, heading for the shore where he'd left Elvin.